Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. So it took a little longer than expected, but I have finally managed to complete the build of this car, the Yokomo SO2 two-wheel drive buggy, and also get it out for a couple of runs. So I thought I'd put together a little video giving an overview of some of my findings when I've built it and some of my feelings about it after having a few race meetings under the belt. So first of all, I'll give a couple of general points about the car. As you probably know, this is quite heavily based on the previous generations of Yokomos that have been developed over recent years. And many of the parts are very similar to those. So if you've got something like an SO1 or a Cal 3.1, a lot of this will be familiar. But there's been quite a few little changes as well. Generally speaking, the build quality is very, very good. The parts quality is very good. As I went through it, I had no problems to speak of with the build. I think there was maybe one screw that was had the wrong number of it in the manual, and the manual itself is very easy to follow, apart from one small quirk, which is that Yokomo bag all of the screws separately, so you do have to hunt through separate bags for the screws to get the right screws for each step. Once you've got your head around that, it's not too much of a problem though. So let's take the body shell off and take a look at the main chassis of the car. Now, as you can probably see, although this is a very nice body shell, very low slung, and I like it very much, it is a bit of a nuisance to get on and off because Yokomo have faired it in a lot around the rear here, which means that you end up having to squeeze it to get it in between the shock towers, and it doesn't come off very cleanly. That's something to watch out for. So the chassis itself is a pretty standard arrangement for a modern two-wheel drive buggy with an aluminium chassis plate. A new introduction for the SO2 is some weight plates, which you can just about make out here. There is an aluminium weight plate as standard fitted under the servo, and a steel electronics weight plate mounted where you can put the speed controller and the receiver. This is a design that's on a lot of the buggies. For example, the associated buggies have these weight plates on them already. One thing I will mention is that although Yokomo took the time to redesign the chassis plate to fit the weighted electronics and servo plates, it's still quite tight fit. It might have been nice to maybe make it a bit wider here, which I believe associated with the 6.4, because this is the typical Hobbywing Elite speed controller. It's a larger than usual receiver that I use, an older Futaba one, but it's a very tight fit on that plate. As you can see, the capacitors don't even go on the bottom, they have to go onto the edge. So that's just something to be aware of. Also using a low profile servo, not a huge amount of space between the low profile servo and the electronics, where I've got my wiring there and my transponder. Another thing to mention about the chassis layout is you've got the adjustable battery tray, again, that's common to most designs, and this one works quite well with the pivoting plates here that hold the battery in place. One thing I have noticed though is that the minimum height of the battery that these plates will take without doing any further chopping is a little bit higher than the smallest of lipos. So this is an Ultra LCG lipo, about 18.5 mils high. I've added a weight plate onto this, I'll talk about that later, but without that weight plate it's a little bit too thin, so it's more designed around maybe a 20mm lipo, so that's something to bear in mind when you're choosing a lipo to go with this buggy. One thing also to be aware of though is that this buggy is very, very light out of the box. The standard build has got lots and lots of plastic parts on it, which some people maybe think is a negative, especially because the previous version, the SO1, had a lot of those optional aluminium parts in the box. But because it's using a lot more plastic, it does mean it's very light. This comes in at about 1450 grams without any extra ballast in it, which is well below the minimum weight limit for racing. Okay, onto the front suspension now, and this is where you'll see one of the main changes for the SO2, which is the shock absorbers. These are a 13mm inside diameter shock absorber. Again, a few of the other brands have been using these over the recent years, and Yokomo have now followed suit. The standard shock setup is quite interesting. So in the front they use a 1.6 piston, 2 holes. In the rear they use a 1.7 piston with 2 holes. The kit front oil is 500 weight, and the rear oil is 400 weight, and that means that out of the box, combined with the relatively soft springs, the suspension is almost rock solid. It doesn't seem to work at all well on the bench. I'll talk about some changes I made later on. Also, another thing that's new on the front end of the SO2 is the steering uprights. These are a new design, again, a lot like the associated style, and also an interesting element of these is that they're reversible. So if you are running a tyre that is particularly wide on the front and you're struggling to get your car within the minimum width, what you can do is you can run the steering upright on the narrow setting, and that'll bring the wheel in. So the box build is for the narrow setting. I've since flipped this around to the wide setting because these Schumacher tyres are not that wide over the edge of the wheel. You don't need the extra clearance. Hand in hand with the change to the upright, they've also gone to a hex that's all-in-one hex and axle, again rather similar to the associated car. Another thing that Yokomo have done is they've changed the wing package as well as the body, so you have this very wide front wing on the SO2, easy way to tell it apart on the track. This wing mounting solution I don't think is new, but actually it's one of the most frustrating parts on the car. It's very difficult to get the wing bolted on according to the method in the instructions. For what it's worth, what I do is I take it off here and bolt it in off the car and then screw it in there if you need to change it. Another observation as well is that they have these metal plates to brace the hinge pins. For some reason, the one on the very front is quite a loose fit, and if you have a crash, it will tend to pop off, at least on one side anyway, and you'll need to pop it back in again. So that doesn't seem to do 100% of a job. I'm not sure if there's any better solutions out there. If you do know of one, then please do let me know in the comments. Rear of the car, again, quite familiar to anyone that's had a Yokomo in the past. Again, the biggest change on the rear is the introduction of these 13mm shocks with 400 oil in them in the kit, and again, relatively soft springs. Because it's sold as a carpet spec kit, you've got the anti-roll bar. It's quite interesting the way that the anti-roll bar mounts. You have this tower of parts on the rear end above the rear arm mount, and I do find this a bit of a fiddle, because if you want to take an insert out to change the rear toe, you end up with all of these parts coming off at the same time, and it can be quite a fiddle to make a change quickly on that. But even though it's a big tower of parts, it is pretty robust. Haven't had any problems with durability at all in the 2 race meetings so far. This runs the longer rear arms that Yokomo have available, the 75mm arms, and the correct drive shafts to go with those arms. Another thing to mention is that out of the box, this comes with a gear diff, and again, a ball diff is available as an option. Just a quick shot of the underside to give you an idea of the finish on the car. So it's a nice anodized aluminium chassis, a nice dark colour, and I have to say that my personal preference is for cars that are a bit more discreet when it comes to the anodizing. So the Yokomo, with its combination of black and grey and hard anodizing on it, is much more to my personal taste than some of the other cars on the market. You can also see there's the small screws here where those weight plates underneath the electronics are screwed in. You've got to be quite gentle with those because there's not much of a thread, and also the telltale here of the screws that are holding the motor waterfall in place. They're the furthest forward position because this uses what they call the LC gearbox, which is the carpet version of the gearbox, which places the motor as far forward as possible. So I'll just give a quick summary of what I've found during the 2 race meetings that I've taken this car to. So the first race meeting was at Swindon, which is an astroturf track, medium-sized permanent astroturf track. Fortunately, the weather was good enough that it dried up during the course of the morning. We were able to get the dry cars out in the late morning and in the afternoon. I put this one down with completely kit settings, with the exception of running Schumacher cut staggers low profile on the front in yellow and Schumacher mezzos in yellow on the rear, a fairly standard dry Astro tyre combination. Impressions were that straight out of the box it just didn't go over bumps and didn't jump at all well. It was like jumping a plank of wood, which I kind of thought would be the case because I wasn't happy about the heavy damping on the standard shocks. So I made a change from that. I reduced the oils down to 400 in the front damper and 300 in the rear damper. Remember that kit is 500 and 400. And surprisingly, that made a really big difference and got the car much, much closer. It was still a little bit nose up on the jumping, but actually it rode the bumps a lot better and jumped a lot better. So I was 90% of the way there just from that change. The general balance of the car was to have quite a lot of steering in those conditions, which I like, and nothing broke. So overall, a very pleasing debut for the car outdoors on a relatively grippy track in the dry astroturf. Second race was at Cardiff at the indoor series run by the Cobra Club, which is a temporary carpet track, so a lot smoother, generally speaking, than the outdoors track. Grip was medium rather than super high. I started the day with the cactus tyres on the rear in yellow, and again with the cut staggers on the front. After a couple of runs, I switched across to the new Fusion Slim tyres on the front, which I think are a lot better. They seem to offer a nice amount of extra steering without any real negativity. During the course of the day, the car was very smooth, very stable, didn't grip roll. After I changed the front tyres, I had a good amount of steering. It was a bit understeery with the cut staggers on it. I made a few more tweaks to the car as well, just to try to get it to ride the bumps a bit better. So I reduced the front oil again to 375 CST, down from 400. Again, seemed to be an improvement and got the attitude in the jumps a bit better. I also, during the course of the day, reduced the rear toe down to 2 degrees from 3 degrees. That didn't make such a big difference, funny enough, but it wasn't a mistake to make that change. It wasn't as effective as the change on the front tyres. So again, overall, very pleased with the performance of the car. Had a few crashes, didn't break anything, was improving with every run of the day, which is always a good sign, having not raced on a full carpet track realistically ever before. So that was a positive day overall, and I'm looking forward to trying this car out more often during the course of the winter indoors and potentially outdoors as well. In terms of next steps, I'd like to try some different pistons in the shocks. Yokomo do a 1.8mm piston, which is obviously 0.1mm larger again, and I'd like to try around that in the front with the 1.7s in the rear and do some work on the oils as well. I certainly think that would be a better setup on bumpy tracks, might be a better setup all round. And the other thing I'd like to try is there's only one part on the car that I'm not convinced by, and that is the plastic mounts, the balls that the top of the new shocks mount in. They're quite easy to over tighten and bind up. Yokomo do an aluminium version of this. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get it yet, but I would like to give those a try and see if they free up the top of the suspension here. Other than that, even though there's quite a lot of plastic parts on the car, for me that's not really a problem. If a plastic part does the job, I'm happy to keep it. It's lightweight, it's cheap to replace. So hopefully you found this overview of the Yokomo SO2 useful. If you've got any questions or comments, please do leave them below. Again, if you want to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, that's a big help to me. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching.